everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a turtle seed Bead Cutie step-by-step gridding and stitching it up for you guys. This was a request. I'm sorry it took me quite a bit of time to get around to doing it, but it did take a little bit of time to edit and film this video. I'm not used to doing this type of video, but let's jump right into it. So to start with, I'm making a little grid. Not usually the way I start out my videos, but today I'm starting with the grid, and then I'll talk about the beads you need and we can move forward to the actual making process. So this is the little turtle I just gridded out. You can see it has a donut for a shell, but what I wanted to mention is in the gridding process, this one bead here showed up as blue, but in reality that should be pink. So right now it's corrected, but in the time lapse of making this grid, it does look like it's blue. So there's our little guy, and then you'll want to grab your post-it note so you can keep track of all the different rows. Something I also wanted to mention is for the first part of this video, the grid that I'm going to be using, the top section of the donut, the sprinkle layout is going to look slightly different, but don't worry, if you follow this pattern, that's the way I bead the turtle. So I know that certain sprinkle colors are a little bit different in the grid that I have off to the side of my screen for the first half of the video, but whatever bead I actually pick up is going to be correct. And this is going to be the little guy you're going to want to grid out, so you don't have to worry about your turtles turning out differently if you just follow along with my video and this template. So I printed out Artbeads free printable graph paper for brick stitch, and I used the cylindrical bead option, but there's also round bead option, so that the little cubes would be more like little ovals, but it really doesn't matter. It all translates over the same in your bead work. So you can go ahead and graph yours out or just follow along with my video. Today I'm going to be making a super cute turtle, and I'm going to be doing this little seed Bead Cutie step by step, so hopefully you can follow along. So to start with, I'll show you the beads you'll want. So I'm going to be using Toho round 11/0 beads for this project. So I bought mine from Artbeads, but you could of course buy them from anywhere you would want to. So these are their opaque, shiny, jet black 11/0 beads. So I've got the black ones, and that will be for the turtle's little eyes. And then we have some matte opaque white. You also will want a green color, so this would be for your turtle's body color. And for me, this will be the opaque sour apple. And then I'm doing a variation on this turtle, and its shell is actually going to be a donut. So for me, the donut color is going to be this opaque light beige. And then I'm going to be using Frosted Ceylon Baby Pink, and that will be the frosting color of the donut. And then here's some interesting beads right here, and these are clear beads. And why you want these transparent crystal beads is because on the middle of the donut, we don't want to have a hole, but we want it to look like there's a hole in the donut. And so we can continue on one long brick stitch row. We're going to be using clear transparent beads so that it looks like a hole even though it isn't in reality. And then we need a few more beads. So these beads will be for the sprinkles on the donut. So if you wanted, you can change up these colors any way you would want to. But I'm going to be using opaque avocado green, and then opaque aqua. This has a pearl finish to it. This one has like a AB pearl to it. I would think that they would have that listed. Yes, opaque aqua AB. And then we have opaque dandelion. And then we have Ceylon hot pink. So using all these beads, we're going to create a super cute turtle with a donut shell. So now I have all my beads laid out in little piles. So you can see the frosted baby pink color. We're going to use quite a few of those along with the beige and the sour apple. And then all the other colors that I showed you, we're only going to need a few of those. Which, there we go. They're all on the screen, I'm thinking. There we go. So then you also will want some beading thread. I'm going to be using Doris Nymo D beading thread. And then I'm also going to be using a needle. You're going to want to use a beading needle. This can be a size 13, 12, even 11 or 10. But I used to love the size 13, but it was very brittle and often the eye of the needle would break, and also my stores stopped carrying that size, so then I went to a size 12 and that seems to work very well. A size 12 or 11 would work, I think, and I actually today will be using a needle. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I got this needle when I was at the Beads and Buttons show, and it was a free needle I got from the Toho booth. So I'm not quite sure if it's a Toho needle or if that's even a thing, but that will be the needle I'm using today. The size 12 would work. And then you're going to want to thread your needle with about a yard of your thread. Now you don't need to use an exact length of thread. That's okay. You don't need to do that because you can always add on thread at any point in the middle of the making of this turtle. So then the next thing you're going to want to have is your grid. So I already gridded this out. I started my video with this grid instead of in the middle as I usually do, but you can see this is our little donut turtle. It's very cute. So that's gridded out on some of Artbeads free printable graph paper, and I'll have that linked below so you can print it out and graph this yourself. So you can see this looks super cute, and now at this point I also find it useful to just have a post-it note, so that little bit of tack can keep track, it can help you keep track of your rows by just sticking it down, and then you know that the row closest to the sticky note is going to be the row you're working on. So now we're ready to start. Okay, so it would help if you knew how to brick stitch already, but if you don't, that's okay. I'll be going step by step. So to start with, what you have to do is a ladder stitch. This starts out the brick stitch process. So when we look at our little turtle, and you can see, I'll remove this for now, you can see I'm going to start on this row right here where I'll make a line with a pencil so you can kind of, if you're making this exact one, follow along. So we're starting on this row right here. So we're going to be starting with the 3 green beads, the 2 beige beads, then the pink ones, and then we're going to be ending with the 4 green beads. That's the row that we're going to start on. So I'm going to put my post-it note right here so we can see that row clearly. So to ladder stitch, this is the beginning of our brick stitch process. We're going to pick up 2 beads. So you can see here we have 3 green beads that we need in all. So I'm going to start by picking up those 2 green beads. So here they are, and I'm threading them onto my needle. So there are the 2 green beads. Now I'm going to pull them towards the end of my thread, leaving myself about a 4 to 5 inch tail. So now my needle had just gone through them this way, so my thread is coming through them, and then my tail is coming down here. So at this point I'm gonna come through and I'm gonna hook the first bead that I put on my needle, like so. So we're almost creating a loop. So you can see when we pull them then, our thread, which I'll zoom in quick, so hopefully you can see what's going on better, but you can see when I pull this, it kind of had been like this, like a loop. and our needle had gone, we added the 2 beads, then my needle I brought back through the first bead, creating a loop. And then when you pull on this, and then you do a little wiggling, they line up next to each other very well. So this is my tail thread and then my working thread coming out of it. So at this point, what I would do is I'm going to zoom out a little bit again. But at this point, what I would do is I'm going to, my thread is exiting that first bead, I'm going to go down through the bead right beside it. And this first row can look a little wonky, and it will straighten out as we go. But you can see there are those 2 beads. And I'll just hold them. So now I'm going to pick up another green bead. Then I'm going to chase my thread by going back through the same bead we just came down through, and I'm going to go down through that bead again. So picture that you're repeating the same step you had just made and you're chasing your thread down through the bead you had just exited. And now we have 3 beads in a row. And my thread is coming out of this middle bead, and we want to be coming out of the end bead, so I'm going to work my way back up through the bead we just added. And pull that tight. And you can see it still looks a little wonky, but that's okay. It, like I said before, straightens out as we go. So now when I look, I have to pick up 1 beige bead. So the thing about ladder stitching is when you start the row, you're going to be picking up 2 beads so you can create the original loop, and then from there we're only going to pick up 1 bead as we go along the row. So I think it'd be better if I had some beads down by me, so I'm going to move some down. But I'm going to pick up 1 beige bead now, and I'm going to go up through the bead I had just exited, so we're chasing the thread again. And pull all that thread through, and you can see it pops up next to it. Now I'm going to go down through the bead we just added. You always want to be exiting the end, the very endmost bead before you add your next bead. So now, looking at, I'm going to move this over here. Let's see if I can get, maybe I can move over a little so we can keep the grid over to this side. That's better. Okay. So you can see I need 1 more beige bead now. So I'm going to pick up another beige bead and chase my thread going back down through the bead we had originally just been exiting from. And you can see it snugs up right beside the other one. Now we're going to go up through that bead we just added. And I'm going to keep on doing this. So now you can see it looks awfully wonky at this point, and it will kind of straighten out. It almost looks like V shapes right now, but we'll figure that out later on. So now I'm going to pick up 1 pink, and go through the bead we had just gone through, chasing the thread. And now we're going to go down through that bead we just added. We need another pink bead, so I'm going to add that one by going down through the bead we just added. And now I'm going to go up through the bead I just put on there. And this is what it looks like so far. You can see we have 3 green beads, 2 beige beads, 2 pink beads. So now the next step is going to be to add a sprinkle color. So for me, I have sketched in that I'm going to use a blue color now. So I'm going to pick up one of my blue beads, and picking this back up, we're going to chase the thread and go back up through that bead we had previously added. Then you can see it looks like that. So now I'm going to go back down through the bead we just added. And that's what it looks like. So now we're going to pick up 2 more beige beads, but we're going to pick them up one at a time. So I'm going to pick up 1 beige bead, go down through that blue bead, and then go up through the beige bead that we just added. Now we're going to add another beige bead, chasing our thread. Oops, caught my template a little. We'll move that back. And I'm sorry if you can hear any loud vehicle noises outside, but it's a summer afternoon, so it's kind of noisy. So at that point, we have 2 more of those beige, and now we need to add 4 more green beads in a row. So I'm going to pick up 1 green bead and go down through that beige bead we just added. Then go up through the green bead. Now add another green bead, go up through that green bead we just added, chasing the thread, and go down through the green bead we just now added. Now I'm going to pick up another green bead, go down through that bead we had previously just added, and go up through it, the one we just put on now. And now we only need 1 more bead, and then we'll be finished with this ladder stitch beginning row. So I'm putting on another one and going down through it. And now at this point, I'm going to move my grid a little bit. And now at this point, this is kind of what it looks like. And it looks awfully wonky, it kind of wiggles all around, and the stitch tension isn't the greatest. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through every bead all over again. So I'm coming down from this end bead, my thread is exiting it, and I'm just going to go up through the bead beside it. And then I'm going to go down through the next bead. We're just going to go every other, up and down all the way across the row. And you can see already it just tightens them up so much nicer looking. So now at this point, I'm coming down out of that bead, so I'm going to go up through the next bead in the row. And then go down through the next bead. So at this point, you're exiting out of the 3rd green bead from the right, and now you're going to, with your thread exiting out of that bead, pick up 2 beige beads, go through the first thread bridge closest to that bead you're exiting out of, and then go up through that beige bead. Now you're going to want to pick up a darker pink bead, go through the thread bridge closest to your needle, go back up through that pink bead you just added. We're picking up another bead, going through the next thread bridge, then going back up through that bead, and we're going to continue this process until we get to the end of the row. And now we're going to add that green bead and go up through it, and then we're going to add our last bead for this row. So here we're coming out of the third bead from the left, so that first beige bead, if you're looking at it from left to right, and we're going to add a beige bead and a frosted pink bead and go up through the frosted pink bead, and then we're going to just continue adding one bead at a time and going across the entire row. Now at this point, when we come to the end of the row, I'm going to be adding this pink bead, and then we're going to be ladder stitching out an additional bead. So there I'm picking up that bead and I'm going to go back up through that pink bead I previously added, chasing the thread, and pull that tight, and then you can reinforce that bead by going down through it. And you're going to want to work your thread so that it's exiting out of the top of that very end bead. Then we're going to pick up 2 beads. As we're starting a row, go through the first thread bridge and then go up through the pink bead that we just added, and then down through that beige colored bead so that we're exiting the bead closest to the edge. And then at this point we're going to be ladder stitching out more beads. So I'm picking up a green bead, going back down through that beige bead that's closest to the edge, chasing my thread, go back up through that green bead we just added, and then we're going to add another green bead, go back up through that green bead that I just added previously, chasing the thread, then go back down through the bead we just added. And now we're going to add a white bead, chasing the thread, going down through the green bead we just added, and we're going to keep on until now we're going to be adding a black bead. And then next up we're going to be adding our last green bead in the same fashion. And now we're just going to be going back down and up through those beads that we just added to reinforce them so that they don't look quite so wonky. They look a little bit more straight, and they also get a little bit more firm so that it's easier to bead on them for the next row. And now we're going to exit out of that frosted bead that we added in the beginning, and this way that's going to be the bead that we're going to start working down the row when we're exiting out of that frosted pink bead. And now we're picking up our sprinkle color, so our yellow sprinkle color, and we can just start doing this row as normal. So we're coming to the end of this row, adding our final frosted pink bead, and now we want to kind of out-dent this row, so we're going to be doing an increase. So I'm adding my beige bead and going back up through that last frosted pink bead that I just added previously, and now I'm going to go down through that beige bead just to reinforce it, and then come back up through that pink bead. And then at this point you're just going to want to position your needle so that for the next row you're exiting out of the beige bead. And now we're going to just start picking up our 2 beads in the beginning, going through the thread bridge and going back up through the bead, and then we can just start adding 1 bead at a time and going through the thread bridge until we go all the way across. And now at this point we're going to be doing an increase on this end of our row. So we're going to pick up a green bead and go back up through the last green bead that we previously added. And we're going to go back up through it chasing our thread, and then we're going to go back down through the bead we just added to reinforce it. And then at this point I'm just going to be working my thread so I come out of the very end green bead for our next row. And at this point we can pick up our 2 beads, go through the first thread bridge on the row, go back up through that bead, and we can start brick stitching as normal across the whole row. So here we are picking up our first see-through transparent bead, and you're going to brick stitch it in just like normal, picking up a bead, going through the thread bridge, and going back up through the bead. And those are the only 2 see-through beads that you'll need for the whole project. So for this row at the very end, we're going to need to ladder stitch out 2 green beads. So we're going to be adding a green bead, going down through that beige bead that we previously finished our row with, and then we're going to go down through that green bead, and then you're going to want to add your next green bead to your needle and go back down through that green bead that we just added. And then you have the beads that you need on there, and then you can just go through those up and down so that you can kind of reinforce them. And then at this point you're just going to want to make sure for the next row that you're exiting out of the 3rd bead from the left, which will be your beige bead. And here you can see that I'm exiting out of that beige bead, and I'm going to pick up 2 beads. It's going to be our beige bead and our frosted pink bead, and you're going to go back up through the frosted pink bead, and then you can start brick stitching like normal across this whole row. And we've come to the end of this row and finished it. So now you're going to want to be exiting out of the second green bead from the right, pick up 2 beads, which will be your green and black bead, and go up through your black bead. Now we're going to pick up our white bead, go through that bead, come back up through that one bead you just added, and now we can start going across the row like normal. Now I'm picking up my very last bead for the row, going through the very last thread bridge, and now you're going to want to weave your thread through so that you're exiting out of the second bead from the left, so that frosted pink bead. Then you're going to want to pick up 2 beads and go through the second thread bridge on that row from the left, so the one closest to that frosted pink bead that you were exiting. And now you can just quick stitch across the row like normal. So this row is a little bit different. After we add our next beige bead, we're just going to go on to the next row. So you're going to want to be exiting out of the second bead from the right. So that's the way I'm going to position my threads, so that I'm coming out of that frosted bead right there. And now we're going to pick up our beads for the next row, continuing like normal on this next row. You're going to want to be adding one more beige bead, and then we're going to be ladder stitching out some green beads for his little feet. So we're going to pick up a green bead, go back up through that beige bead that we just previously added. Then we're going to go back down through that green bead we just added. And now we're going to add our next green bead, chasing the thread and going down through that previous green bead that we just added. And now at this point, you're just going to want to reinforce those 2 beads, because you can see how loose it kind of gets when you do this process. But now you're just going to want to reinforce. Exiting out of the very end green bead, you're going to want to go through the first thread bridge on the row after picking up 2 green beads, and now we're going to go back up through the green bead. Then we're going to add another green bead, and then you're going to want to add another green bead, doing the same normal brick stitch process across the whole row. When we come towards the end of this row, we're going to be ladder stitching out 2 beads. So I'm going to pick up a green bead, go up through the last bead that we just added, chasing the thread, going back down through that bead we just added now, and then we're going to pick up another green bead and then go down through that green bead we just added. And then you're going to want to reinforce your little ladder stitch area, and then you'll be ready to start. You're going to want your needle to be exiting out of the very end bead. Then we're going to pick up 2 green beads and go through the first thread bridge, go back up through the green bead, and then we're going to add another green bead. Now we're picking up another green bead and stitching it on as well. And now at this point, what you're going to want to do is position your thread so that you're exiting out of the second bead from the left. And we're going to complete this flipper before we move on to the rest of the donut. So now I'm picking up 2 beads, going through the second thread bridge from the left, going back up through that green bead, adding another green bead, going through the thread bridge, and then we're going to be ladder stitching out another green bead by going up through that green bead that we previously added. And now I'm going to work my thread so that I'm coming out of the second bead from the right. And then we're going to be picking up another 2 green beads, going through that second thread bridge from the right, going up through our bead. Then we're going to pick up another green bead, go through the next thread bridge, pick up another 2 green beads now, and we're going to go through the first thread bridge on that row. We're starting another row. Now we're going to pick up another green bead, go through the next thread bridge. Now we're going to work our needle so that we're exiting out of the very center bead out of these 3 beads. You want to be coming out of that center one so that your thread is exiting out of the middle bead. and we're going to pick up 2 green beads and go through the thread bridge and then go back up through one of the green beads. And at this point your little flipper's done, and you're going to want to complete that same step for the other side, but right now we're moving on to working its way across this row, adding our 2 beads to start with, and then 1 more cream bead, and then a 4th cream bead to finish up this little donut. And then we're going to be working our needle so that we can be exiting out of the 2nd green bead or the 3rd green bead from the left. And then we're going to be adding on 2 green beads, go up through one of the green beads, and then add 1 more green bead, go through that last thread bridge on that row. So at this point, we're going to repeat the process that we did on the other side, on this side, making both the flippers and completing the donut. At this point, you're going to want to finish up both the sides of the turtle's head, and then we can move on to the finishing touches. So generally at this point, when you get to the point where you have your seed bead cutie completed, I would bring in my 15-0 glass seed beads, and these are see-through. And I got these from Hobby Lobby, and it's the Bead Treasures brand. And basically you just want very small 15-0 see-through beads. And I would pour out a few, and you really only need about 6 for your top loop. So exiting from very, very center tip bead of our turtle's head, I would pick up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. It's kind of up to you how big of a loop. And then if my thread is coming out of that top bead going in this direction, I would chase that thread going into the bead from the opposite direction and chasing the thread through. And that will help you create a little see-through loop at the top. Then at this point, I would go back up through those see-through beads and go through all of them once again, and just go through all those beads, and then go through that green bead again, and that should just reinforce it. And you can do that a few times just to continue to reinforce it, just by going through those beads a few times. But at this point you're basically done, and all you're gonna have to do is weave in your threads, which you're just gonna want to just random, it doesn't matter whatsoever, but you're just gonna randomly bring your needle up and down and around throughout several of these beads and just kind of weave in, which I'll do a quick time lapse of kind of showing that, but it really can be random. The one thing I would probably say is try to avoid these center 2 beads that are see-through, because we want as few thread paths through those center see-through beads as possible, because we don't want them to look opaque. We want them to be as transparent as possible. So at this point I've gone through that top loop that we've created a few times, so I'm just going to start weaving through the beads. At this point, the last step is just to snip off that thread. So I could bring in my scissors, and I would just take them and just snip that thread as close to the little seed bead cutie, so as close to the beads as possible, so you don't see thread sticking out. And at this point it's done, and that is how cute it looks. So if I didn't explain it well enough, so you don't quite know how to do it still, I will be leaving a video down below where someone else explains how to brick stitch, and then hopefully that could be a helpful video for you if you didn't quite still grasp fully how to do this. I think, as far as I know, this is the first time I've done a beaded tutorial, so hopefully it turned out okay and you kind of understood it. But this is definitely a super cute turtle. I mean, it's really fun, and you can of course alter the sprinkle colors, the sprinkle placement. You wouldn't even need to add the sprinkles. The shell I changed into a donut, but of course you could do a traditional turtle shell. I've done a video on my channel before where I show a sea turtle that has a traditional shell on that one, so you could look at that one's grid if you wanted to. So you could, it's the same body shape, so you could follow that one. You could follow that one with that coloring and watching this tutorial. You wouldn't need to do the donut for the shell. I also wanted to bring in another example of a turtle that I beaded up, and this one is the same sort of thing, but you can see I did darker colors. It's a lot more pigmented. It can be easier to see and grasp what it's supposed to be. So I used darker brown, and then I used turquoise for all the different sprinkles, and then the few darker pink beads that I used for sprinkles in this donut is actually what all the frosting consists of for that one. But they're the same exact turtle, and I think they're cute, and hopefully you will be able to make and create these and use them for lots of different fun things this summer. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.